Renting is one of the ways many Filipinos choose to live, especially when they cannot afford to buy their own houses. However, there are some people who take advantage of this and abuse their rights as landlords.
Ako si Dave. Since 2009 pa ako nag-rent sa mga apartments. Recently, actually last year, nagkaroon kami ng problema sa isa naming nirentahan. Yung sister ng landlord, pumasok kasama ng dalawang lalaki. One of our tenants was taking a bath that night. Tapos, bigla na lang pumasok sa bahay yung sister, asking the tenant na dito daw matutulog yung dalawang lalaki na pinakilala niya na taga-barangay. So, yung isa nag-freak out. Ang ginawa niya, pumunta siya sa barangay, dumiretso siya doon, nagsumbong, and then eventually lumabas nga na invasion of privacy na yon. So, sa amenities, nung pagdating namin doon, eventually after a month, nalaman namin na wala kaming sariling metro sa tubig, na tatlong units pala doon ang humahati doon sa meter sa tubig. Tapos, may dumating na bill from Meralco na nagkalagay doon, illegal connection. Tapos, ang chine-charge kami ng 7,000. Nakita namin sa landlord, sabi niya, bakit ganito, ganyan? Tapos, after a month, bigla na lang nawala yung charge. We asked Meralco about it, pero ang sabi, binayaran daw ng landlord. They never informed us na post-dated checks pala ang way of paying. Ang pagkakasabi sa amin ng time na yun, parang magbabayad lang kami through cash. Wala kami nagawa. We had to open an account under yung pangalan ng kasama ko. From the experience that I had, nung lumipat kami, naging meticulous ako sa kontrata. Siguro mas maganda na yun, nagkaroon ng law. Tapos, at least mas empowered kami na nagre-rent. Even though that we're renting, we still have the right over what we are renting or what we are leasing.
In 2009, then-President Arroyo passed Republic Act 9653 or the Rent Control Act. What does the Rent Control Act cover? What should people know when renting an apartment or house? What are the penalties for landlords who do not follow this law? Good evening, I am Attorney Karen Jimeno and you are watching Legal Help Desk on the Solar News channel. This show is about making the law work for you by giving legal advice on topics that matter to you.
And I'm Attorney Rod Nepomuceno. Tonight, we will be discussing your rights on the issue of rent, what you need to know before you rent a property, and what you need to do during the effectivity of the lease. We will be discussing this issue later with our guest, who is a legal expert on this matter.
Yes, but before we introduce him, let us answer a few questions from our viewers. Our first question is from Vince, and he asks, do we have any laws that cover renting or leasing properties? What are my rights as a renter? Well, Vince, we have a few laws that cover renting or leasing. One of them is the Civil Code of the Philippines, which really applies to basically a lot of the rights and obligations of the lessor and the lessee. And we also have recently passed last 2009 the rent control law. This basically prohibits lessors from increasing the rent by more than 7% per year. But this only applies to certain lessees or certain lease contracts. We'll discuss that later on in more detail. But basically, those are the two laws that apply.
Yeah, that's right. And our next question naman is from Edna, and she asks us, I have an abusive landlord. What are the grounds for filing a case against him, and what penalties will be given to him if found guilty? Okay, we have to qualify this abusive landlord and what exactly this landlord is doing. No? Of course, the abusive landlord is usually the one that charges a high rent, no? Or increases your rent every month, or more than once a year, or let's say just abuses you by not repairing the apartment. No? So there are a number of abuses, but if we have to qualify it. No? If it falls under the rent control law, and we'll explain later on which lease contracts fall under the rent control law, it could subject the landlord to penalties, no, criminal penalties, and we'll explain that in a little while. So there are a number of course, you can go civil and go and criminal, but when it comes to the rent control law, the penalties there are criminal in nature. So we'll explain that in a short while.
Yes. And I'd like to add to the question of Vince, I forgot to cover the rights of the person renting. And basically, your rights include being able to exclusively enjoy the rented property during the term of the lease, meaning yung nagpapaupa sa inyo cannot disturb your possession of the property during the period of the lease. And this is even if they sell or mortgage, assuming sinanla nila yung lupa, hindi ka nila pwedeng paalisin as long as your lease contract is in effect. And another right would be, generally, you can sublet or pwede mong paupa sa iba yung property as long as the lease contract does not have an express prohibition.
Right.
Okay. And then now we have someone on the line, and I was told it's Julia, and let's see if they've connected her. Hi, Julia. What's your question?
Good evening, Attorney Karen. I want to know how the lessor come up with the value of the rental fees. Is there a science or mathematical equation involved to this? How do they determine if the rent should be of a certain amount?
Okay. That's a very technical question.
Yes.
Meron pa siya scientific or mathematical basis. Actually, right now, there's really no law which says kung ano dapat yung rent amount. And normally, for lessors, what they do is basically charge a rent that is prevalent or the going rent in that area. So pag tinignan mo, if you go to a certain area, usually magkakapareho yung charge nilang rent. But normally, it also goes into what type of property are they renting out. Is this nicer than the ones next to it? Kasi they also take into account din na hindi sila malulugi. So there's no fixed formula, although, as we've mentioned earlier, we have a 2009 law, yung Rent Control Act, that prohibits lessors from charging more than 7% increase ng rent every year. But this does not apply to all properties. You have to be covered by the law. And that means generally na yung rent mo should not exceed 10,000 pesos kung nasa NCR ka or highly urbanized cities or in any other parts of the Philippines, hindi tataas ng 5,000 pesos yung rent mo.
Yeah. So the answer to your question is more on, not so much on the amount, no, but more on the rate of increase. No? There is a limit to the rate of increase. Lalo if you're covered by the rent control law. Now, our next question comes from Agnes, and she asks, I want to rent a condo soon. Wow. What should be included in the rent? Are association dues, utility bills, and parking excluded from it, or should it be included in the rent? And what should I look out for when reading contracts? What are the most advisable terms? All right, to answer your question, now parking fees and association dues, and what is the other one? Parking fees, association dues, and utilities. No? We'll take one step at a time. Utilities, obviously, it's not covered. No? It's just like any other thing that you rent. Hindi covered yung utilities, electricity, and water. Unless it's stipulated,
because there are some places na kasama na, really high rent, but then it includes utilities. But so, very, rare.
This is for cases where there's no provision in the contract. Utilities are normally not included because that goes to the utility company. And parking fees, well, most condos, parking rental is actually separate from the main unit. No? So usually it's not included unless, of course, it's stipulated. And finally, association dues normally goes to the condominium corporation. So unless there's any specific provision in the contract, the general rule is that the fee that is indicated there is only for the rent of the place itself. Now, what should you look out for? Now, basically the conditions, no? And more often than not, it's the conditions of ejectment, what will give the landlord the right to eject you. So you have to watch out for all those conditions. For example, bawal ba yung pets? No? Bawal ba yung pets dyan? Or let's say, it's only for residential, you can't use it for any business. And let's say you have some kind of buy and sell business. Are you allowed to have inventory or stock there in the place? No? So you have to watch out for all of those conditions. And basically, that's indicated naman in the lease contract. So, yun.
Okay.
Right?
There's really a lot of questions for this episode, but we have to take a short break. Legal Help Desk will return after these reminders. still watching Legal Help Desk on the Solar News channel. We are now joined by attorney Ryan Esteves. He is a law professor and an MCLE lecturer. Good evening, Attorney Ryan.
Good evening, Attorney Karen.
Good evening, Attorney Ryan.
Yes.
Welcome.
So first, let's start with our case study for today because it seemed like may mga violations dun sa lease contract. One, they talked about this stranger who suddenly entered their premises, yung lease premises, and started, using
Well, they stayed
the
there.
property.
Diba? They
Yeah,
brought it
habang
to-
may
to-
naliligo pa na isa sa mga lessee, di ba?
Parang invasion of property, so to speak.
So maybe we can advise them on what they could have done. It seemed like lumipat na sila, but for those who experienced something similar, na kung saan sila nag-rent, bigla na lang may pinapasok yung nagpapaupa, what can you advise them in terms of the remedies?
Actually, parang trespass to dwelling yun, di ba? So basically, merong direct action yung lessee towards the trespasser. Pero talking about the Rent Control Act, pwede tayong mag-file ng case against the lessor, especially pag yung lessor yung nagpapasok doon sa dwelling, no? We can file a
In
case.
this case, it's yung kapatid eh.
Yung kapatid, so
nung
it's a lessor,
landlord.
oo.
It wasn't the lessor, it was the sibling of
Pero-
the lessor who came.
Yes.
It's still a stranger.
Oh,
Stranger to their
stranger,
lease
yeah.
contract, right?
So, meron tayong mga remedies like, in that case, you can file trespass to dwelling yun. But in another case nga, kung lessor mismo yung pumasok, at we can violation of the contract of lease. So, pwede tayong mag-file sa
Regional Trial Court for breach of contract.
Yes.
Right.
Or we can file a criminal case sa MTC for
Yes.
violation of rental laws.
Yes. But yung Rent Control Act, di ba, meron ditong penalties on basically imprisonment
Yes,
and
yes,
fines.
yes.
But, Attorney Ryan, I guess this is the time that we can clarify to our audience kung ano ba talaga yung mga lease contracts or basically renters na covered ng law na to. Kasi hindi lahat, di ba?
Yes, ang covered ng ating Rent Control Act is yung mga lease contracts, especially in Metro Manila and highly urbanized cities, that yung rental ranges from 1 peso to 10,000 pesos. Pero pag outside Metro Manila, other areas in the Philippines, yung 1 peso to 5,000 pesos, yun ang covered.
So basically, it's really for low rents, di
Yeah.
ba?
So it's really to protect these tenants or low income. Is that
Yes,
right?
actually, it's a social welfare law, no? So it actually aims to protect those who cannot afford to buy a nice house, no? So they go for lease.
Okay.
Now this law is only up to December 31, 2013
Yes,
this year.
yes.
And of course the provision on escalation of rent, which is being capped at 7%, is only up to December 31 this year. So what happens there? What happens after that? Is it open for?
Yeah, because it's
any
already
rate?
ending this year,
This
by
year.
December, yeah.
So there's stated in the law, no? So but there is a provision under the Rent Control Act na kailangan i-review ng HUDCC. So by this time dapat ginagawa na ng HUDCC 'yon.
HUDCC stands for
Housing Urban Land Development
Coordinating Council,
Coordinating
right?
Council,
Yeah.
yes.
Now,
And, sorry, I'd like to also cover one more aspect dun sa case study natin today. They were also talking about basically yung illegal na connection. Kaya sila tuloy, because obviously
Sinarge
dito sila yung tagabayad ng utilities, but sila tuloy yung charge. So for renters na meron obviously ginagawang illegal yung lessor nila, yung may-ari ng property, what can they do? Where can they report violations, for instance, and what remedies can they undertake?
Actually, this should fall under violation of rent control law, no? Kasi you cannot adequately and enjoyably, peaceably enjoy the lease. So it will fall under this violation of law, and then we can file a criminal case.
Yeah.
Now,
But then, also, kung hindi sila covered ng rent control law kasi more than 10,000 yung lease, they can still file a
Yes,
case,
yes,
right?
yes.
As sa breach, as in, because of,
Sa
under the
sa
civil
breach of
code.
contract, no? You can file a civil case.
Now, Tony Ryan, what are the exceptions? Now, obviously, we know that generally, once a tenant comes in and you have a lease contract, you have the right to peaceably and adequately
Enjoy. Yes, yes.
enjoy the premises, diba?
Yes.
What are the instances when the landlord can eject?
First, pwedeng i-eject ng lessor yung lessee if inassign yung rights, assignment of rights, no? Or establishing without the consent of the lessor. And also yung arrears. Hindi siya nakapagbayad for more than 3 months. Or actually 3 months, no? And then pwede rin, if there's a legal need for the lessor or the immediate family members to use it, no? Provided merong notices, yes. 3 months notice advance and all that. And then also if there is a necessary repair. So pwedeng and then lastly, expiration of the lease contract.
So in those exceptions, the landlord, but he still has to give notice in all
yes,
these
in all these
instances,
cases,
diba?
yes, in all these cases.
Okay.
Okay.
So I hate to interrupt you, gentlemen. We
So
have to answer a few
we'll
more
answer a few
questions
questions.
from our viewers.
Ayan, okay, we'll answer a few more
And
questions.
Of course,
and-
Attorney Esteves will
Yes,
help
sir.
us. And
Okay.
our first questions come from June. And is this a
June?
phone call?
No,
Okay,
June,
we have-
what's your question, June?
Hello, good evening.
Hi. Hi, June.
Good evening po, attorneys.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. I've been renting this apartment now for 2 years. Then the landlord gave me a notice to vacate the apartment because he will have the apartment renovated now. So, tapos later I learned that after the renovation, he rented the unit to someone else, to another person. Am I covered by the Rent Control Act? Is there something I can do about it?
All right. So basically, the landlord let him go. Basically saying that he was going to have it renovated.
Yes.
And then now he's going to rent it to some other person. Is he covered by the Rent Control
Yes,
Act?
he's covered by the Rent Control Act.
Yeah, but first it depends. How much rent is
Yeah,
he
what-
paying?
oh,
So,
yes.
It's Ryan, right?
June.
June. Oh yes, Attorney Ryan. But June, check first. How much are you paying? Kung nasa Metro Manila ka or any highly urbanized city, kunwari Cebu City, are you paying more than 10,000 pesos na rent? Kung hindi, then you're covered by the Rent Control Act. Or any other part of the Philippines, kung nasa probinsya ka naman and you're not paying more than 5,000, then you're covered by the Rent Control Act. In which case, ano po yung mga rights niya, Attorney Ryan?
Kasi if there is a right ng lessor to evict the person, no, especially if there is a legal need for the family members to renovate and all that. But those sa case na kasi, it will be rented to another person other than him.
Yeah.
So there is express prohibition in one of the cases is yung you cannot lease the property to another third person in a period of with at least 1 year.
1 year, no? Yeah,
one
that's right.
year.
So you have
in
to
this
give
case,
first preference to the previous lessee.
Yes,
Alright.
yes. In this case, covered siya.
Covered
Kung,
siya.
yun nga, sabi
Oh,
ko
kung
mapasok
kasama ka
sa...
sa rent control.
Yes.
But then, even if June, you're not covered by the Rent Control Act, if for instance your lease contract, check your lease contract kung ano yung period. If your lease contract gives you 1 year to stay on the premises, hindi ka niya pwedeng paalisin. And if he said it's to undertake repairs, tapos nakita mo na pinarent lang sa iba, then he's clearly in breach, or we're saying this in violation of your lease contract with him. Then you can file a case with the regional trial court to complain and basically file a complaint for breach of contract against your lessor. And
Right.
our next question comes from Margs, and she asks, is there a government agency or an office where people can report or file a complaint against abusive landlords? So, Attorney Ryan, this applies to both assuming Rent Control Act and non-Rent Control Act.
Yes. If it's a violation of the Rent Control Act of 2009, it will be a criminal case. No, you can file it in the MTC, Metropolitan Trial Court, for violation of rental laws. But if it is under the Civil Code, no, you can also file an RTC,
Yeah,
right? No, a
lalo
specific
na- yeah.
performance, no, to compel the lessor to perform the obligations
So,
under the lease.
in a nutshell, the Rent Control Act makes it criminal
Yes,
to violate, to be an abusive landlord.
Yes.
Yeah, so beyond, if you're not covered under the Rent Control Act,
You can file
it's
a civil case.
It's a
Yes,
civil
civil
case.
case.
All right. So that's quite clear. Now we have a question. Teddy from Twitter asks us, when should landlords raise their rental fees, and how many times in a year should they raise it? What is the percentage to raise rent? Is this covered by the Rent Control Act? I think this is pretty much the coverage of
Yes.
the main provision of the Rent Control Act,
Yes.
diba? The escalation clause.
So hindi ka pwedeng mag-raise ng rent mo
Yeah.
beyond 7%
Per year.
per year. Pero yun nga, the question is, pwede bang staggered?
How many times? Yeah. For
How
example,
many
the first
times?
quarter you raise it for 3%. The second quarter you raise it 2%.
2%.
The third
Pwede
quarter.
pa, di ba? As
Pwede pa,
long
as long
as
as
it does
hindi-
not
yes.
amount to increasing by more than
7%.
7% per year. What about, yung nabasa ko din dito sa law, meron namang provision para dun sa mga nagsistay sa dorms
Yeah.
or bed
Yes.
spacers.
Mga students, no?
Oo. Sa kanila.
Especially students,
Yes.
no?
Parang iba yung application,
Yes,
right?
kasi sa ordinary lease contract, pag nabakante yung place, the lessor can set an initial rent for the next lessee na different rate. Pero sa boarding houses, especially for students, isang uniform.
In other words, even if there's a new tenant, if there's a new
Yes.
tenant, you have to keep the
rate
The
for
rate.
the tier.
Also,
Once lang.
iba yung rate sa kanila, di ba? Like for other people who rent, you cannot raise by more than 7%, but if you're staying in a dorm, you cannot increase the rent by more than once
More than
in a
once.
year.
Once
Meaning,
in a year.
kunwari, if the landlord raised the rent by 4% that year,
That's it.
wala
Doon
na,
lang.
di ba?
Hanggang doon lang.
That's the maximum, I
Yes,
mean, because
yes.
you can't do it more
And
than
this
once.
is only specifically if the tenant is a student, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
And
Student.
it includes master students.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Right?
yes.
Any kind of
Assume,
student.
no?
Yeah.
But let's
Alright.
also clarify na if you're not covered by the rent control law, this won't apply. So basically, your lessor can increase the rent by more than 7% or more than once a year, but assuming you don't have a contract that prohibits them from doing this. So pag may contract kayo naka-fix na yung rent, then you have to stick with that.
Yeah.
And we have one more question from Michelle via Facebook. I have rented out my family's house to a foreigner and his family. There have been many times when they have been delayed with the payments. Under the Rent Control Act, how many days should pass before a payment is considered delayed? So, Michelle, before we start answering your question, let's just first make sure that you're really covered by the Rent Control Act. Again, dapat yung rent nyo is not more than 10,000 pesos if you're in Metro Manila or other highly urbanized cities. Other parts of Metro Manila, not more than 5,000 pesos. But then, maybe Attorney Ryan, you can help us answer the question na how many months in arrears or basically bago niya ma-evict yung
Yes, Attorney Karen. Pag, especially yung coverage ng NCR in highly urbanized cities, tapos yung sa other areas, at least we have delay pag hindi siya nakabayad ng 3 months na arrears niya.
Okay. This
So
is
basically-
assuming they're covered by the
Yes,
Rent
yes,
Control
yes.
Act.
Pero pag hindi siya covered ng Rent Control Act, anytime pag kulang yung payment mo.
Immediately.
So, kunwari,
Okay.
I'm a lessee, tapos hindi ako nakabayad this month sa rent ko, pwede na akong paalisin, evict by next
But you
month.
need a notice of payment for, demand for payment.
Okay.
And then if you want to file an ejectment case, you need to give a notice for to vacate.
Okay.
Now, I want to
So,
qualify, no? Kasi a lot of, we're saying that the qualification here is you're renting 10,000 and below, right? 10,000 or below 10,000, right? That seems to be the magic number. But the law actually states a minimum of 1 peso to
1 peso.
10,000. So my question is, if you are leasing it, let's say may lease contract ka, but you're giving it for free. I mean, really, I'm allowing you to stay. You're not charging. Are you controlled by the Rent Control Act?
No?
You're not. So
Because
it
rent
has
is...
a 1
Has
peso
to be
minimum
1 peso.
eh.
to be onerous.
Oo.
No, there should be a
right.
price.
there has to be a price.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, so basically we're running out of time,
Yeah.
so I'd like
Yeah.
to give our audience basically a recap of their rights as either
Yeah.
renters or kung kayo yung nagpaparent. If very crucial dito ho na distinction, are you covered by the Rent Control Act? Again, as we've been emphasizing, para covered kayo ng Rent Control Act, your rent should not be more than 10,000 pesos if you're staying in Manila or any other highly urbanized city. And it does not define sa law, no? But I guess highly urbanized cities would be places like Cebu, Davao, yes.
Yes.
And if any other parts of the Philippines, like maybe provinces like Laguna, for instance, dapat hindi more than 5,000 pesos yung rent nyo to be covered by the Rent Control Act.
Yes.
And then maybe, Attorney Ryan, you can give basically just tips on what rights they have as renters.
Yes, you can demand. No? You can demand for the delivery nung lease or to maintain yung necessary repairs. You can also demand for yung conditions na ma-enjoy mo yung lease, no, yung property.
And sorry, I'd just like to add pala, yung mga covered ng Rent Control Act, something that you should be aware of is that your lessor cannot demand more than 1 month advance rent from you, and then they also cannot demand more than 2 months deposit from you. Kasi may iba, bina-violate to
3 months.
eh.
Diba? 3 months advance, 3
sobra,
months notice.
diba?
That's 3 months advance and 3 months deposit.
Yes.
That's normally common.
Eh, what about you, Attorney Rod? Any
Wala eh.
parting
Words.
tips? Yeah.
Well, there's still plenty to know about. All I know is that as a landlord, and when you're allowed to do necessary repairs, and as a tenant, and this applies whether it's a Rent Control Act or not, you're supposed to tolerate the repairs. Diba?
Yes.
And then there's a 40-day rule that if the repairs go beyond 40 days, then you have the opportunity to ask for a reduction of your rent. All right. There's still a lot more to cover under the Rent Control Act, but unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. We'd like to thank our guest for clarifying with us your legal rights on the issue of rent and the Rent Control Act. Thank you very much, Attorney Esteves, for joining us tonight. And I'm Attorney Rod Nepomuceno.
And I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno. Join us again next Monday as we talk about your legal rights on the issue of violence against women for non-married couples. Good night.